Now on to, in a change to the advertised programme, Close Up North tells the inside story of the investigation into the region's worst civil air disaster.
In May last year, 12 people died when an airliner crashed in these fields at Dunkeswick in North Yorkshire, just 4 minutes into a scheduled flight from Leeds to Aberdeen. Tomorrow the government will reveal the findings of its inquiry into what led to the tragedy here. Tonight, Close Up North examines what went wrong and looks at the tougher safety regulations that are likely to follow for Britain's booming regional and commuter airlines.
Leeds Bradford information, time 1733, runway news 14, surface wind 100, 10 knots.
I'm fortunate enough to have an office with a great view overlooking the airfield and the runway and the apron. The weather was quite changeable throughout the day. In the morning we'd had brilliant sunshine, and then it got quite windy, and we ended up with some fairly hefty thunderstorms rolling through, and dark clouds, all kinds of hail and rain.
It's a free-seated flight, so you find your own seat when you're on board, OK? Boarding will be through departures, which is just behind you.
Knight Air were a home-bred airline, and we were very proud to have them based here. They operated Bandeirante aircraft through a number of routes, and particularly the Aberdeen route was doing very well.
Slot time 1015.
If you're ready, I can let you depart at time 10.
That evening, the cloud base was low. The crew of Knight Air Flight 816, a Brazilian-built Bandeirante, knew they'd be busy. They'd be flying in instrument meteorological conditions, that is, relying solely on their flight instruments from very soon after takeoff.
It was a normal flight, Leeds Bradford to Aberdeen, with a mixture of business travellers and people visiting friends and relatives. Some would have been regular passengers known to Knight Air. They would have known the crews, and some would have been first time with Knight Air. It departed as normal on its route to Aberdeen, and at the time it departed, the bad weather had gone through the airport, and it departed in a normal fashion, but very soon reported a fault.
That radio call from the flight deck of Flight 816 reported a problem with the artificial horizon, perhaps the most important basic flying instrument, and the crew requested a return to the airport. But Flight 816 never made it.
It's easy now with hindsight to look back and think I had something of a premonition, something of that feeling. It's easy to say that, but as soon as the phone call came to my office from air traffic control, I felt I knew that there was something wrong, that there was a disaster.
Hello, this is Leeds and Bradford Airport.
Yes.
A full emergency. We believe that an airliner has crashed near to Harewood House area.
And what size is it?
It's a small aircraft. Maximum seating is 19.
19.
We just booked on duty and the alarms went. It said that we were going to a plane crash and everyone was having a little joke, saying, oh, it'll be nothing, it'll just be a plane flying low. We'll be turned back to the station before we've even started. I'd only been out of training school 4 months, so it was a big number.
Station officers with 5 riders.
It was an awful night, a lot of rain, wind, thunder, lightning. I remember it vividly as a really bad storm. The roads themselves were actually appalling because the water was actually standing on the roads and it was still raining on the way there.
We got a call from the Rescue Coordination Centre at Edinburgh to tell us that there had been an aircraft crash and we were to scramble immediately.
Lovely radio, this is CT128.
The weather was so bad that we had to go at about half our normal maximum speed, so it took us about half an hour to get there.
The one thing that sticks in my mind is the silence that there was when we turned out. It was so peaceful. There was no sort of rushing around, there was no sort of engines whining. There was a little fire that we put out, but as soon as that was put out, there was just nothing. It was just quiet.
Well, I actually got into the field and I started to link up the other emergency services. We carried out a recce of the field itself and where the casualties actually were, and it soon became very apparent there wasn't going to be any survivors from this aircraft.
It was spread out, I would say, over a good half a mile. It was also different in that you could actually recognise one or two bits of the wreckage, say a seat, an aileron, that sort of thing. And that made me think that the thing had broken up in mid-air.
Target 4.
Go ahead.
White aircraft. 9 casualties located, all believed critical.
Oh my God.
That fire service radio message confirmed there were no survivors. And at the scene, difficulties were piling up. There's only one narrow lane to the crash site, and it quickly became clogged. And the radios of the various rescue teams weren't set to the same frequency, so they couldn't talk to each other. If there had been survivors, getting them away from the site would have taken a long time.
North to south, along the wreckage, for as far out as you guys will stretch.
The next morning I came down at 7 o'clock and we went out into the field in teams. I was one of the team leaders. The ultimate aim was to actually locate everything in that field, basically.
We have a hammer down here. Hammer.
It was important that each item
All I need is the label.
was actually marked with its exact location, because that would actually assist the air accident investigators. It would assist in working out, hopefully, what could well have happened in the air. You see things, everyday things which you see in an aeroplane, the seats, the life jackets, the ashtrays, and to see them all scattered about in the field had a strange effect. I think a lot of officers would bottle things up inside, so you really can't tell how it affects. But everybody, I think, who drives past the lane end now sees a Dun Keswick sign. It would, I don't think anybody would actually not be moved or even have a fleeting thought about what went on here.
It was to be an investigation made more difficult because the Bandeirante didn't carry a black box flight recorder. Instead, the Department of Transport's Air Accident Investigation Branch would have to use other clues to unravel what went wrong with Flight 816.
We can be ready to depart within a few minutes to an accident site. That's part of the preparedness. And we use the best, you probably appreciate that no prizes for getting the second best expert in this business. And we have to make sure the expertise we use in our investigations will stand up to rigorous standards of scientific challenge. So we generate a very large team from what is a relatively small unit here at Farnborough.
The AAIB normally says little about its work and never discusses individual incidents. But Close Up North has been given unprecedented access to the most senior investigation branch official. Most of their investigations end with recommendations to improve air safety, and the painstaking work at Farnborough has helped solve the mysteries behind air disasters like Kegworth and Lockerbie.
There are times when we're not able to positively prove that a particular set of circumstances led to the accident. In those cases, we will examine a number of scenarios, and we usually come up with a most likely option, which we will take safety action on.
The Knight Air flight crew, Captain John Casson and First Officer Paul Denton, died in the crash, along with their stewardess and 9 passengers. They'd be unable to help. So just what did the investigators have to work with concerning the fate of Flight 816?
Slot time 1015.
The commander of Golf Oscar Echo Alpha Alpha that evening had more than 3,000 hours in his logbook, although he'd only just been promoted to captain. His first officer had less than 50 hours experience on the Bandeirante. Close Up North has established that this combination of crew is frowned on by the Civil Aviation Authority. Their view is that a recently promoted captain should be partnered with an experienced first officer and vice versa. It's known that at some point as it departed, at least one of the aircraft's 2 artificial horizon instruments failed. Based on radio conversations with the airport, it's believed that the captain was actually flying the aircraft because all the radio exchanges were with the first officer.
699, turn right, heading 360.
Alpha Alpha began turning left soon after becoming airborne. It maintained a steady speed and rate of climb, but failed to respond correctly to the radar headings passed by the controller. The crew, wrestling with the loss of crucial blind flying instrumentation and in cloud, asked several times for confirmation of their heading. The first officer asks twice, "Are we on a steady heading?" But controllers could only monitor the radar as Alpha Alpha entered a tightening left-hand spiral dive. As the investigation got underway, a similar aircraft was used to confirm the radar pictures of the crash, which had been recorded at the airport. And the AAIB released those facts which had been established. Because there was no cockpit voice recorder on board, regulations didn't require it, the investigators, other interested parties and anxious relatives began to realise that precisely what happened on board Alpha Alpha in those last crucial seconds might never be known. Southend Airport in Essex. In an attempt to understand more about the problems the crew of Flight 816 faced, Close Up North tracked down one of the last remaining Bandeirantes in Britain. Chief Pilot Graham James and First Officer Philip Marsh are about to take off for Leeds Bradford Airport. They're familiar with the heavy workload faced by flight crews.
6 levers.
Start.
Okay, battery master.
Is external and voltage plus power is good.
Shut-off valves.
Both open.
Warning panel.
Okay, it's checked and fire checked.
Instruments.
Okay, all looking...
There are 2 artificial horizon instruments on the Bandeirante flight deck, but there is no independent third instrument which is carried by larger aircraft. It's known that there have been instances of these normally reliable instruments requiring unscheduled replacement on the Bandeirante.
Okay, brakes. Check. Flight instruments.
Okay, turn coming up. Turning left bank, left ball right, decreasing, decreasing, decreasing.
The minimum equipment list in Knight Air's operations manual would have spelled out whether it was permissible to continue a flight with defective equipment. A key question is when the instrumentation on Alpha Alpha began to give problems.
Take off now, set your levers. Airspeed to live through 60 knots.
Bank control.
Your controls. Knots rotate. Positive rates.
Gear up, please.
Gear up. Travelling.
For any flight crew, an airport departure and climb out in bad weather produces a very high workload. Once in cloud, with outside visual references gone, the need to rely on the aircraft's basic flying instruments is absolute. Keeping a mental picture of how the aircraft is behaving, its position, what its attitude is, all becomes very demanding. And that's without the addition of a problem, or even suspicion of a problem, with an instrument as vital as the artificial horizon.
Oh, it's crucial. The 4 instruments you see here are what's termed in the classic T formation. Those 4 are predominantly the most important instruments. that we have to deal with. Out of those four, this is perhaps the most important, the artificial horizon. It tells us more or less where the nose of the aircraft is, the attitude in relation to the horizon, and where the wings are in relation to straight and level flight. It is possible to fly the aeroplane without it, but it's considerably more difficult to fly without it. And the big question, if you didn't have it, would be how quickly you might recognize that you've got a problem with it.
With only 2 artificial horizons and no independent third instrument to use to cross-check any errors or malfunctions, it's possible the Knight Air crew could have become convinced that both instruments had become defective.
With 2 of us here, once we'd established that we did have a failure or partial failure, we were to some extent getting the wrong indications, I would simply hand it over to the first officer and he would continue to fly on his.
A double failure of these instruments is not unknown, and Close Up North has established that accident investigators now want to see every passenger aircraft with more than 9 seats fitted with a third backup artificial horizon to act as a final check for crews in difficult flying conditions. A third horizon might have saved Flight 816.
Yeah, we're getting radar vectors. We're going to 1024. Okay, showing 7,100. We're on the approach now into Leeds. We're under radar control. The closer we get to the ground and the busier we get on an approach or a departure, the instruments are super critical. Whereas back in the cruise, we had a very light load on our minds. It's very easy to monitor things. Now, with everything moving about, it would be much more difficult to recognize a fault should one occur. The workload now becomes extremely high. In severe weather, it would become dauntingly high.
All pilots are trained in flying without them, but it is really a very difficult thing to do. It's something which requires frequent refresher training and quite a lot of willpower to ignore something which you know is telling you lies. If the artificial horizon tells you that you've got to put your attitude into a certain one and then pull up, and you do that and you find that that attitude is wrong, then you know you've really got serious problems. You've got to look to the very basic instruments, the less compelling ones which don't ever make errors, and ignore the most compelling of the lot, and that's a major problem.
The RAF also has an interest in how aircrew cope with instrument flying at the limit, using what are called the secondary flight displays, without the artificial horizon.
So helicopter about half a mile coming towards us. Clear right.
This pilot is about to enter cloud, just as the crew of Flight 816 did. He'll not be able to rely on his natural balance. He'll begin a rigorous routine scanning his instruments, in which the artificial horizon is central.
It's certainly fundamental in Royal Air Force training, when we're practicing our instrument flying, that we spend an awful lot of time flying on our secondary or our bottom line displays, purely to make sure we are capable of operating the aircraft on those displays. If you're not happy with your flight displays and you don't have any visual cues, in other words, that you're in cloud or at night or a situation like that, and you're manoeuvring at either a rapid or slow rate, you are in trouble area, because your vestibular system will be confused. You often find that you'll try to believe those cues and disbelieve your flight displays. It's certainly drummed into everybody, or it should be. Fly the dials and ignore what the seat of the pants or your vestibular system is telling you in those circumstances.
The crew of Flight 816 were almost certainly suffering from what's known as spatial disorientation.
Yes.
It's a phenomenon which comes under scrutiny here at the RAF School of Aviation Medicine. Research has revealed that under conditions of high stress, pilot performance can be degraded.
Now, would you like to try putting your right ear onto your right shoulder and describing what you feel?
People revert. They go back to using cues which they have used before, the sensations arising within them, which they have acquired the knowledge that these are unreliable in the flight environment and should be ignored. But under these conditions of high stress, and sometimes the pilot can make use of and attend to his own sensations to the exclusion of information provided by the instruments.
Research psychologists from the School of Aviation Medicine test just how long the average pilot can keep control of an aircraft with no visual cues.
Can't see a thing.
Without adequate visual information, either from instruments or from the outside world, sooner or later you will lose control.
I want you to maintain a level turn, Flight Lieutenant.
Experiments carried out in the States in which pilots were suddenly deprived of visual information showed that control was lost in a matter, I think, of the order of 40 seconds when the aircraft was flying straight and level, and in 20 seconds or so when it was in a turn.
You can get to a situation quite easily in most aircraft without really noticing it. A gentle increase in the angle of bank of the aeroplane, you don't perceive that it's rolling, and then suddenly, depending on the type of aircraft you've got, you will find it reaches an angle of bank at which it rapidly starts to increase its angle of bank. The nose will drop down, it will tighten into the turn, which is developing, and the speed will rapidly increase. If we're talking about 2,000 or 3,000 feet, we're talking about seconds before you are actually about to hit the ground.
In most recent large airliner crashes, the final manoeuvres of the aircraft can be deduced from information contained in on-board flight recorders, built to withstand enormous forces. Taped information in the recorder can be analysed, and from it, a computer-generated three-dimensional picture of the aircraft's flight path can be produced. The wreckage of Alpha Alpha is taken to the AAIB at Farnborough. In this case, there is no on-board recorder to help the investigation. Built in 1980, the Bandeirante was just under the weight threshold, which made fitting a recorder a legal requirement.
There are weight limitations below which, in the past, aeroplanes have not been required to carry certain types of safety equipment, of which cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were one.
The argument was one of economics and cost-effectiveness.
When you're flying very small airliners, if you were to carry all the safety equipment that a large airliner is required to carry, the cockpit voice recorder, the flight data recorder, backup equipment of all sorts, frankly, the aeroplane would only be able to struggle off the ground because it would be so heavy that it probably wouldn't be able to carry any passengers for gain. So not only would the airline not be able to make money, but passengers who need to travel over short commuter-type distances would not have that service available to them.
But that's going to change. Close Up North has learned that the investigation branch wants all passenger aircraft with 9 seats or more to be fitted with a cockpit voice recorder.
The most ready source of information that we have for the immediate aftermath of any accident is usually the flight data recorders. And the cockpit voice recorder tells us what the crew, what they were saying, their actions, and gives us enables us to build up a flight deck environment, if you like, to understand what was going on. Invaluable information. There is no substitute for that.
As technology develops, is there a case for extending this requirement downwards so that more and more aircraft are fitted to a lower and lower weight?
Yes, I think there is, because technological improvements in recording systems have led to very much smaller, more compact recorders. So yes, there are good technological reasons now why we should have modern recording systems on the lighter types of aeroplanes.
Through 40 or so years of development, the flight recorder has become both lightweight and sophisticated.
The current state of the art would be this type of recorder here, which would either be a flight data recorder, a cockpit voice recorder, or a combined unit which records both voice and data. So you have a complete transcript of both cockpit voice, the pilot, the co-pilot, and a very large amount of information on what's happening in the plane.
The latest type of digital flight recorders particularly suited to modern cockpits with electronic flight management systems. Access to the data is easy, and it can contain many hundreds of items of information, such as speed, height and heading. And any one of these pieces of information can be singled out for detailed analysis. Knight Air no longer exists as a scheduled airline. Today, the Leeds Aberdeen service is operated as a British Airways franchise by Euromanx. It's BA company policy for all their aircraft to carry flight recorders. It's been recognised they bring commercial as well as safety advantages.
Modern digital flight data recorders can be tremendously useful to an airline because at the end of every flight they can download all of the data on how the airplane has behaved, which can enable the engineers to carry out preventive maintenance. And they can see this from the flight data recorder. They can use it not just as information for finding out what the hell happened when something went disastrously wrong, but they can find out when something might go wrong.
It's called the Quick Access Recorder, and it uses a removable optical disc.
The reason for fitting this type of recorder is that you can analyse that data and look at dangerous trends. So there are definitely economical benefits which should at least cover the cost of installing this equipment and running a programme which look at this data in advance to try and prevent accidents.
For older aircraft such as the Bandeirante, some see benefits in simple measures.
Cockpit voice recorders are a very simple thing to fit. If this aeroplane had had a cockpit voice recorder, we would know a great deal about what the pilots were struggling with, how they were dealing with their problems, and as it is, we may not ever find out precisely what their problems were, and we certainly won't find out precisely how they were dealing with their problems. So that's the main lesson, I think. Should cockpit voice recorders and flight data recorders be retrofitted to old aeroplanes? I think if they're in public service, they definitely should be.
Okay, 935, good afternoon. Continue descent flight level 80.
It's normally a matter of more wiring and possibly the fitting of new sensors, so that it's a little harder to fit these types of systems to the older aircraft. So at a reasonably low cost compared to the benefits involved in investigating these types of accidents, you could retrofit both flight data recording and cockpit voice recording equipment to these aircraft.
This is Bandeirante Alpha Alpha, the airliner destroyed in the Dunkeswick crash, being prepared for Knight Air's official launch. But even that wasn't the first time it had flown the Leeds Aberdeen route. Commuter airlines have always existed on the margins of the airline business, springing up and fading away, and Alpha Alpha had already flown for Yorkshire European Airways, which quickly went broke. Only a tolerant attitude by the aviation authorities allowed the industry to exist at all. Exempting smaller aircraft from the rules on black box flight recorders and cockpit voice recorders are just one example of the concessions made to allow small companies to survive. Those left behind have to reconcile themselves to the knowledge that precisely what went wrong on the flight deck that stormy evening will never be known for sure. Their only comfort may be that as the safety regulations are tightened, they'll be the last to suffer the agonies of not knowing exactly why their loved ones died.